From the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, HEC TV, Boeing, and the Danforth Center are proud to present Conversations, a discussion about translating plants to healthcare applications.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Molly Klein, and I'm a plant scientist by my academic training. I'm retired from Monsanto Company. I spent the majority of my working career advocating for the use of new technology and innovation in plant science and agriculture. And today, I still consider myself an advocate for plant science and agriculture, and that includes for the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, and I really enjoy being able to spread the word about the world-class research and programs that are going on here. And this is really a treasure that we have in St. Louis. I'd like to welcome you again and thank you all for braving the elements. And oh my gosh, what a last 24 hours we've had. And I don't know about you, but I am ready for spring. Okay? But this has a little connection to what we're going to be talking about tonight. Let's talk about nature's medicine, translating plants to healthcare applications. And I hope we're going to hear a little bit about the importance of daffodil and snowdrops there. Okay. So tonight is our first conversation for 2014, and it also marks the start of the 11th year of conversations. We're still talking, and we have so many more topics to still discuss. I'd like to acknowledge the Friends Committee and also the Conversation Committee for their continued support of Conversations. Now tonight, we will be recording by HEC the conversation, and this can be aired, or will be aired, I should say, starting on Sunday evenings at 5 p.m. on April 20th. And then you'll also be able to access this conversation and past conversations through the Danforth's website. Now, I hope that most of you saw this card upon coming into the auditorium, but it has the bios of our panelists on it, and also it can be used to put any questions that you might have for the panelists, and it'll be collected later during the program. And with that, I would like to introduce our moderator, Professor Davis from Washington University, and also our distinguished panelists this evening, Mark Trudeau, who is President and CEO of Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals, and Dr. Tony Kuchan of the Danforth Plant Science Center, who is the Oliver Langenberg Distinguished Investigator and Vice President of Research here at the Danforth. And you are going to hear the Danforth's commitment to plant science research and how that research can help improve health and well-being of individuals. You're also going to hear about the rich history and the present and the future of Mallinckrodt's work in the pharmaceutical and healthcare area and how those are both connected to plant science. So without further discussion, I'm turning it over to you, Professor Davis.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. I think this could be a very interesting program tonight, and I'm glad you all are here to be informed and, I suspect, entertained by the conversation that will be coming. As I've given thought to the topic, I've thought generally about the connection between plants and medicine that is so old, and I'm certain we'll learn more about that. But the connection became clearest to me when I looked on my medicine shelf and discovered that a medicine I take for atrial fibrillation, which is an irregular heartbeat, Well, I say I take it. I just take it. I can't pronounce it. Digoxin. These people probably know how to pronounce it. But it comes from a plant originally from foxglove. Or I could have just taken a bottle of aspirin, which came originally from the willow tree. And if I'd had the time and inclination, I would have gone down the rest of the contents of my medicine cabinet to see what other plants were represented there. But beyond this context, let me ask our distinguished guests, how important today are plants? Herbal remedies have been used for thousands of years. I've read the number 60,000 years. I've read before civilization, plants were being used. Today, with the pharmaceutical industry as strong as it is, and so much being able to be synthesized, are plants still important?
Yes, they certainly are. So plants are our original materia medica, for sure. And the history of plant use goes back before written history. And to tell you,
Do we have a little more volume, Tony? Maybe put it on that side.
I can, well, I can just do it this way.
I was
I'm being
beginning
too
to wonder whether there was
soft-spoken.
a plant that helped with hearing loss.
Not that I know of yet. Yeah, okay. So we'll start it again. Plants are our original materia medica. The use of plants goes back before written history. So many, many, many thousands of years. And today, yes, it remains very, very important because about 25% of our pharmaceuticals today, hardcore pharmaceuticals, come from plants. And they're still a source, a potential source for new anti-cancer compounds, new painkillers, new medication against atrial fibrillation or high blood pressure. To give you a little bit of the story of what Jim showed you with digoxin, that comes from the foxglove plant, and the use goes back to the 1700s in England. A physician named William Withering used to make extracts of foxglove and give it to patients who suffered from what was called at the time dropsy, congestive heart failure. It increases the strength of the beating of the heart muscle. And we still get digitoxin and digoxin from foxglove today.
And one of the things we know is that Tony's exactly right. At least 25% of pharmaceuticals come from plants. But the interesting thing is that of all those pharmaceuticals, it's only derived from about 100 plant species. And given the fact that there are literally thousands of plants that are available, thousands that are yet undiscovered, it feels like the opportunity for medicines to continuously come from plants over time is virtually endless. And I think that, certainly from a Mallinckrodt perspective, the core part of our business is essentially pain medications. And these pain medications are derived from poppies, whereby opium and all of the pain medications derive. And, from our standpoint, this is a core part of what we do. And if it weren't for plants, we wouldn't be in a very, very important fundamental business that really provides significant benefits for patients who are in pain. So for us, being integrated with plants for medicine is just a core part of our business and has been for almost 150 years.
Are there any programs by companies or by the government to attempt to discover more plants that have medicinal properties? You said we rely now on maybe 111 plants that provide most of the medications. There are lots of things in tropical rainforest that haven't been discovered yet. Are there important medications waiting to be discovered?
There certainly are. So let me give you some numbers. I think it puts it into perspective. What Mark was talking about, we're using maybe 100 species of plants. There's about 400,000 plant species on our Earth, and chemists have looked at maybe 10% of them. And from that 10%, we know over 200,000 different chemicals or phytochemicals. So the amount that is out in nature that remains yet to be characterized and tested as a potential medicine is huge, absolutely huge. And we still discover, we have very good relations with the Missouri Botanical Garden here in St. Louis. Botanical Garden is discovering every year about 200 new plant species. The most abundant plants have long been characterized, but those rare plants still have not been characterized. They have not yet been discovered. And worldwide, we discover about 2,000 new plant species per year. So the potential is largely untapped, and it is an amazing number of chemicals that could still benefit mankind if we went out and discovered them and tested them.
Does climate change threaten some of those plants? Might plants, even before they're exploited, go extinct? Or might plants that are now being exploited, maybe exploited is the wrong word, but plants now being used could go extinct, and then what would we do for the medication they provide? Is extinction a major issue?
It is because there are certain medications, morphine is one of them, that come from only one plant species, only from opium poppy. So if a plant such as opium poppy would have become extinct in nature, then we lose that chemical forever. Another well-known example is tubercularine. That's the arrow poison from the South American Indians. Tubercularine is a muscle relaxant, and it enabled the first open heart surgeries. So you paralyze muscle when you're going into the heart. That comes from only one plant species, from a vine that grows in South America. So conservation is truly important, and also plants that are used today to provide medicines when they cannot be cultivated like opium poppy can. If we're doing wild collections, that's not sustainable, and those plants would be threatened also.
You know, one of the interesting things too is whenever we discover or a medicine is discovered from a natural source, a plant-derived source, typically what you try to do is understand exactly what the compound looks like, try to isolate it, and then try to synthesize it in a laboratory, specifically because you don't want to have to be dependent on cultivated sources. But oddly enough, sometimes when you do that, even though it appears that the synthesis is identical from a compound perspective, it may not react exactly the same way as the plant-derived or the natural-derived source. So I believe, and I think the industry believes, that a continuous fostering of development of medicines through natural sources, including plants, is going to continue to be very important.
2 or 3 times now we've mentioned the poppy as a plant that yields pain medicine. I can imagine there would be some people, anti-drug people, who would say, let's get rid of those poppies. Is that a threat?
Well, I think like any medication, a product like pain medications that come from opium, that come from poppies, they can have tremendous beneficial effects, but they can also have side effects if they're used inappropriately. And certainly pain medications, opiates, as we call them, that are derived from poppies are very, very potent pain medications. And they actually provide relief from pain, particularly intractable pain, like for cancer patients, in a way that no other products that we're aware of today can. The flip side, or the downside to that, is that because these products are so potent, they have the potential for addiction. And one of the things that the industry is doing, and certainly Mallinckrodt is on the leading edge of this, is trying to balance that very potent and beneficial effect of pain relief with the downside, or the potential downside of inappropriate use. And so one of the things that we do is we look at ways that we can introduce tamper-resistant technology, abuse-resistant technology, so that the patients that need pain relief have access to these very potent medications, but there's an opportunity to reduce potentially the addictive nature or the potential for abuse for people that are using them for other than medicinal purposes.
So keeping the poppy going is important, even as we try to limit the risk associated with the poppy.
Oh, certainly from our standpoint, being long-standing in the pain arena, being able to cultivate poppies, being able to extract the opium and the other opiates that come from opium from pain medications is absolutely crucial. If you've had a chance to see the display out in the vestibule where we showed the actual cultivation of the poppies and the processing that we do right here in St. Louis, that is the fundamental source of virtually the majority of the pain medications in the U.S. as they apply to this opiate category, if we didn't have those natural sources, if we didn't have those poppies available, then certainly, while there may be other sources, they wouldn't be nearly as readily available as the poppies. So it's absolutely crucial that we continue to cultivate this type of approach to extracting pain medications.
Let me take the word cultivate and run with it for a minute. Does Mallinckrodt grow poppies, or does it contract with farmers who do grow poppies?
Right. So we've had this debate many times, actually. What business are we actually
Well, it's a
in?
first for me, but it's a natural question.
That is a very good question. But seriously, we've had this debate several times. And we at this point, we purchase the extract of the opium from the farmers. We don't do the farming ourselves. We're not really an agricultural business. We're a chemical manufacturer. We're the synthesizer of chemical compounds. We're a developer of medicines. So our process really starts when we purchase the opium extract from the farmers. However, because of the fact that these products are what we call controlled substances, meaning that they have the potential for addiction, we're very integrated into the supply chain, meaning we have relationships with the agricultural companies that provide the opium extract. But our job really starts when we buy the extract, bring it to our factories, do the purification, do the extraction of the active ingredient, and then finally put it into a finished dosage form that patients can use in their medicine chest.
Okay. We've talked a lot about pain. Tony, what are the leading diseases or leading medical issues that plant-based medicine is helpful in? I think, for example, of dementia, Alzheimer's in particular, a variety of cancers, acute illnesses like pneumonia. Where are plant-based medicines most helpful, most curative, and where do you rely not on plant-based medicine, but on other synthesized products?
Based on efficacy, plants are active, or plant products are active against a large number of conditions, but probably the best known drugs, the blockbusters, come in the anti-cancer field. There's some extremely important, powerful chemotherapeutic agents that come from plants. Pain, morphine, codeine, these are enormous products. There's things against motion sickness coming from plants, bronchodilators that come from plants, even the drops that the doctor puts in your eyes to dilate your pupil during an eye examination is coming from plants. In areas where we're not dependent on plant products would be in the antibiotic area. Those are still coming from nature, mostly from bacteria, from fungi, from microorganisms associated with sponges. Any kind of molecule that is relatively uncomplicated that a chemist can make in a commercially feasible way then would bypass a plant or a microbial product. And those are scattered across the board as far as indications are concerned.
Are there areas of the globe where plants or herbal remedies are more common than more refined pharmaceutical products? If I were in China or India, never mind Bangladesh or Nigeria, would I be getting a commercially available pharmaceutical, or would I just go out and pick something?
Okay. Almost any country other than the United States has a more advanced herbal medicine mechanism. And if you are in a country that is economically challenged, you won't be able to afford to purchase pure pharmaceuticals that come from drug companies. And believe it or not, this is about 75 to 80% of the people that live on our planet that rely on plants as their primary source of medication. And these are plants in the form of traditional Chinese medicine, so they could be mixtures that you're getting from a pharmacy. It could be Ayurvedic medicine in India. It could be plants that you're collecting yourself. If you're in biodiversity hotspots that are not well developed, like places in Central Africa or places in the Amazon. It's a surprising percentage of the human population that relies on plants as the sole source of medication.
And plants almost straight from the field or straight from the jungle or straight from the garden. For a long time, I've often thought about my garden, my home garden, as a salad garden. Now, should I think of it possibly as a medicine chest garden?
It depends what you're growing in your garden, Jim, okay?
Well, you used the word farmer 2 or 3 times.
I think it's too hard to grow salad in a garden in St. Louis. There's deer, there's rabbits, there's voles. My garden is poisonous plants. Yeah. Medicines, medicinal plants. My garden is full of medicinal plants.
Oh, boy.
I think we should come back to the issue that Tony raised just a bit about countries like China. You mentioned this concept of traditional Chinese medicine. It's very interesting the way medicine is practiced in China, because you actually have kind of fairly standard Western medicine operating side by side with this traditional Chinese medicine, which is largely herbal remedies. And in many cases, those two are complementary. You will find practitioners using both, or you will find patients going to a Western physician and a traditional Chinese medicine physician. And in many cases, it actually, at least anecdotally, has proved to be, that those types of patients can do well with both approaches. So it clearly shows that, that it doesn't just have to be, medicines derived from plants don't necessarily just have to come from Western sources. If they come from a traditional source, they can be effective as well.
There are a few other questions I want to ask, but we're beginning to get written questions now. So let me turn to something from the audience and see how it goes. Sometimes the concern with plant-based medicines is consistency of natural resources. How has that been addressed over time? And I'd add on to that, how do you address the issue of taking 2 or 3 different plant-based medications and having them interact, unfortunately, with one another?
Well, I think this is something that's actually very important, and here's where there's I think a nice partnership between, at least in our case, what happens at the cultivation level, the farming level, versus what happens from modern pharmaceutical development methods. The challenge with some of the products, obviously, is when you extract it from a natural source, just as you described, it's tough to get a consistent dose, and many medications have a relatively narrow therapeutic window, meaning if you give the right amount, it has the desired effect. If you give too little, it doesn't have any effect, and if you give too much, it can be toxic in a number of different ways. And I think what we do within the pharmaceutical industry is we create consistency in dosing so that physicians and patients are assured of what they're getting, and not only is the dosage consistent, but the purity of the active ingredient is also well characterized. So that I think is a quite important partnership between this natural derivation of the raw material and then the final product that actually the patient uses.
This becomes more complicated when you talk about traditional Chinese medicines or Ayurvedic medicines, because they are mixtures. And we don't even have in our national drug approval system a way to test these for efficacy. It's anecdotal, although these medications have been around in many cases for thousands of years, so there must be an efficacy there, otherwise they would have disappeared. The National Institutes of Health, it's part of our federal government, has established a center. It's called the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, where they specifically target traditional medicines to test them for efficacy, understand them better, what the components are, how they interact with one another in positive or negative ways, and to introduce ultimately some kind of quality control into these medicines so that they can be approved as pharmaceuticals as mixtures in the United States. It's a complicated story, and it's going to take a while yet to figure out how to do this.
Well, the quality control issue is related to this question. How do you view the future of plant-derived pharmaceuticals? What are the trends? Will we continue to find plant pharmaceuticals important, or because of quality control issues, will plant-derived pharmaceuticals diminish in importance?
Well, from the industry perspective, I think that clearly looking for sources of medicines from a variety of different sources is going to continue to be very important. One of the challenging things that we have in medicine is that there are a number of diseases. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry doesn't do a very good job of actually curing anything. What we do a very good job of is creating additional value in the sense of helping patients deal with disease in a way that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise be able to. And so we're constantly looking not only for curative medicines, but we're looking for medicines that are going to enhance the ability of patients to extend survival, for example, to have a better quality of life. And in doing so, the challenges get harder and harder. So you have to look across a spectrum of sources, natural sources, including plants, including animal-derived sources, including synthetic sources, including bacterial sources, really a broad spectrum to address some pretty challenging issues that still remain in medicine today. So I expect fully that medicines derived from plants is, if anything, going to accelerate over time.
Well, then why, to ask another question that is very appropriate, why is it so difficult to bring new plant-based medicines to market? Now, part of me says, is it difficult? But if it is difficult, then why?
It's difficult to bring any naturally derived medication to market simply because if you have a synthetic molecule, it's relatively more straightforward and easy to characterize exactly what's in it and to test it. Sometimes naturally derived sources, whether they're from plants or animals, but plants included, sometimes what's actually being extracted from the plant is a mixture of things, as Tony said. And then it requires a lot of analysis to determine what is actually the active ingredient in this mixture. Or is it the mixture that's actually creating the efficacy? And that just adds an additional level of complication. Certainly, we've solved some of those problems over time. But as you can imagine, having to extract from a variety of different potential sources of efficacy just adds a little bit more time and complexity to the development cycle.
Supply is a concern. If you do find, ultimately, you can maybe identify one chemical that's the active component, that's your new drug, but then you need to be able to produce enough of it to get through clinical trials and then to meet market demand to help all the people who would benefit. And when it comes from a plant, it's not always clear how one is going to get the supply. If that plant can be cultivated, as can opium poppy, then the problem is solved. If the plant is a vine growing in the South American jungle and doesn't want to grow other places or produce more of the compound, then you face a real challenge of how you're going to produce enough of that compound. Sometimes you can synthesize it, sometimes the structures are too complex and it becomes too expensive to synthesize it chemically for commercial purposes. And these are the kinds of things that we look at here at the center, where we introduce plant biotechnology into developing alternate sources of plant-based pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I think one of the anecdotes is the creation of cancer agents called taxanes, which were originally derived from I believe it's the bark of yew trees, is that right? And so there was these taxanes, which are very potent oncologic drugs, were discovered out of this bark. But as Tony said, trying to extract sufficient quantities for the patients that could benefit was a real challenge. And I think actually these trees were endangered, protected species. So here you have this tremendously valuable medication that's essentially you can't get to because the trees themselves are endangered. So Again, that was, I think, a real success story between the industry and, in this case, the NIH to come up with a synthetic version of what was available in the yew tree bark, because these medications were so beneficial to patients, we had to find a way to produce them in commercial quantities, and we did it.
Here's a question that is relevant to what we're talking about right now. Can morphine be made synthetically?
Morphine, there are a number of derivatives of morphine that can be made synthetically. Morphine itself is actually an extraction of opium itself. And there are a variety of different pain medications which are what we call semi-synthetic, meaning they start with the base opium, and by manipulating the molecule a bit, we come up with some medications that in some cases are either more potent or more safe or both, and become more effective pain relievers based off of the original opium plant.
It would be an academic exercise, and it has been done to make morphine synthetically, but it's too expensive to do it commercially.
I missed a word. It doesn't work to do it commercially. It's too expensive.
It's too expensive for a commercial. It's much more economical to isolate morphine from the opium poppy than to try to synthesize it. And that's the case for many, many different drugs, too.
Well, that relates to a question here. What's the average cost to bring a plant-based medicine to market? Or is it so variable that the average wouldn't mean anything?
I'm happy to give that a shot. Costs a lot of money to bring any medication to market. If you look at statistics that the industry has provided, it currently takes about $1 billion from discovery to market for any new medication, regardless of its source, on average. Naturally derived medications, because again, typically are a bit more complex, are probably on the upper end of that cost spectrum.
Do we explore tropical plants and or cold weather plants for medicinal purposes? To put that another way, are there currently active exploration programs, or are we focused simply on continuing to exploit plants that we know have medicinal value?
There's two approaches to that. There's work going on in academia that's federally funded. There's work going on in private industry. One approach is random collection. Just go out and collect whatever you can grab and bring it back and test it. And another is based more on traditional uses, where people will talk to shamans and find out, or local peoples, how the different plants have been used medicinally traditionally, and then target those plants for analysis. It does go on. It is up and down in its popularity at any one point. Industry does it for a while, then they pull back. It's always going on in certain academic centers, but not to the same scale that industry could do it.
And what's the research program at the Danforth Plant Science Center doing? I know you're focused on plants and medication, but what in particular is going on here? And how will you get from here to either application or prescription?
We look at sources of medicinal. So we look at plant compounds that are either commercially sold as drugs or compounds that are in clinical trials where supply is an issue. And there's one of the stories is the daffodil, where we look at galantamine and try to understand how the daffodil makes this chemical, and then move that machinery into another plant. And if some of you were out looking at the table, the plant that we're concentrating right now is Camelina sativa, where we try to put the drug synthesis mechanism into the seed. Camelina is readily cultivated, seeds are easily harvested, and then one can purify the drug from the seed. So that's just one example. That's how far we would take it. Now, to take it through to commercialization, it has to go over to a company in partnership with a company.
This is on target. Does the Danforth Center share its discoveries with companies like Mallinckrodt or others who can bring products to market? What kind of relationship exists between the bench research and then what's going on in corporations. Mallinckrodt is a good example.
In general, not specific to working with any kind of pharmaceuticals from plants, the Danforth Center does patent its discoveries. So we do generate IP, and then we market that IP to companies to try to turn that IP into products, into commercialized processes.
Yeah, just from a philosophical standpoint, not specific to the Danforth Center, but we think about the way industry is trying to discover and develop really some pretty, solutions to some pretty challenging diseases. One of the things that the industry has recognized is, while the old style of research and development used to be each individual company would try to do their own research and spend a whole bunch of money and hope that something was going to come out of that research, what we've actually found to be more effective is, because innovation can come from virtually anywhere, it makes very good sense for the industry to partner with organizations like the Danforth Center or other organizations that are focused on research, whether they're coming from plants or other sources, to ensure that the likelihood of something being discovered that will ultimately develop into a medicine that can benefit patients, the likelihood is increased. So in a way, the industry's been able to expand the reach on research and development by doing partnerships with both private and public institutions to ensure that we're bringing new medications as quickly as possible to the market.
Another way that we approach this for the more entrepreneurial faculty members is we have spin-off companies, and you will see some of these in Bridge Park. There's a number of companies there that have been founded by Danforth Center faculty.
A few minutes ago, I asked the question about the average cost to bring something to market. What about time? Are we looking at 6 months or 6 years?
Actually, neither. Again, typically what we find is that if something goes quickly, you might be able to go from discovery to market in 10 years, okay? Typically, it takes even longer than that. And again, as we move into more and more difficult challenges, difficult medicinal challenges, that period is typically extending, despite the efforts of the industry to really accelerate discovery methods to be able to screen a number of different compounds in ways that we could never do before. It's just it gets harder and harder to find the solutions. And again, that time frame can easily extend beyond 10 years.
To 15.
15, 20. We've been working on problems for 30 years.
And the average lifetime of a patent?
Average patent life at this point is about 20 years. Yep. And again, keep in mind that you typically patent something literally at the moment you discover it. And then from there, it takes about 10 more years to get it to market. So by the time you get to market, you've used up about half of your patent life.
It's a wonder we get to market. With only 10% of plant species studied or characterized, how can basic research speed up bringing new medicines to market? Or I would add, can basic research speed up the process of getting to market?
We certainly could speed it up. It's dependent on financing of research. The federal government could speed it up by putting more money into plant science. The more people that you have working on a project in parallel, the faster it's going to go. The more plant species that could be collected and analyzed. And there's also the pharmacology. So it's not just access to new plants and new chemicals. It's also having ways of screening those chemicals in a very specific way for the various indications and diseases that are of concern to humanity. That's also a limiting factor.
Yeah, my general sense is that what's going to speed things up are the industry and a variety of different groups that are involved in scientific discovery, partnering in ways that we haven't thought about before. Again, there still is a bit of a mentality in the industry that we have to invent things within our own walls. And that's breaking down, fortunately. And to the extent that we as the industry can break those walls down completely and recognize that partnering with a whole variety of different organizations, institutions to help, create more knowledge and more discovery of potential medicines is, to me, a potential pathway to speed things up.
But it will take a while.
It's happening, but it'll take a while. Yep.
One of the things that occurs to me we haven't talked about at all, we talked about the medicine chest in the garden, but not in the spice drawer. Most of the spices that I'm familiar with come from plants, and a lot of spices might be said to be medicinally active or potentially active. Are there spices that stand out to you all as having medical value?
Absolutely. Eat curry. Eat lots of curry. The turmeric in curry has wonderful anti-inflammatory compounds in it. It's worldwide one of the most important compounds or preparations in the form of turmeric powder or curry to use against inflammation associated with arthritis. Ginger, another wonderful, wonderful food that is very health promoting because of the antioxidants.
And the one that I always like, but I can't pronounce it very well, Tony, is capsaicin, right? Is that?
Capsaicin.
Capsaicin, thank you. Capsaicin, which is the what makes peppers hot, right? It actually can be used very effectively as a pain reliever. Particularly, there are a number of products in development to treat the pain associated with shingles, for example. And so that's another spice that we know quite well that seems to be quite effective.
In Europe, capsaicin is added to topical creams. So if you have a pulled muscle and you put a cream on that causes your skin to heat up, that's capsaicin from peppers.
Are there other spices in my drawer that might be helpful?
Rosemary, an herb.
Right.
Okay.
Rosemary is also known to be very, very health promoting. Maybe what more of you would be familiar with is lavender. The scent of lavender is very relaxing. A lot of people use it to relax at night and to sleep.
Witch hazel?
Witch hazel, yeah, you're rubbing this on topically, I think also as maybe as a painkiller. Yeah? Astringent, okay.
And wasn't clove oil at a certain point used as a pain reliever in dental procedures,
yes,
right?
yes.
I remember a
That's
movie that
Yeah.
used that, right?
Oh my.
Dustin Hoffman, and yeah. That hurt. That hurt.
You think of menthol, Vicks VapoRub, this bronchodilatory activity of the various mints.
Oh, yes, mint.
It's also good for sinus inflammation to have various mint oils.
It's a wonder we go to doctors. We could just...
Maybe we would go more often if we didn't have these things in our
Sure.
refrigerators and our food cabinets
sure,
at home.
Sure. Other questions from the floor? We had one voice over here with a question, and some of you have been reluctant to put your questions in writing, but I'd be delighted to get them.
Jack is
Yes.
raising his hand over here.
How many other companies like the Danforth Science Center are there in the rest of the world?
Well, I guess I'd start by saying I thought the Danforth Plant Science Center was unique. You might ask other companies like Mallinckrodt, and someone here would probably say, no, there aren't.
Oh, sure. But you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to punt this over to our president when he gets up at the end, if he wants to say a few words. There are other plant science centers around the world, but we are truly unique in our size and in our not-for-profit status and in being totally dedicated to plant science. Yes?
Could morphine be grown, the opium plant, be grown in this country?
Do you want to? I have a story.
Yeah, go ahead. You tell your story, and then I'll give my point of view.
Okay, okay. The growing of opium poppy for commercial purposes is internationally very, very, very highly regulated because of the abuse potential. Opium poppy needs a slightly cooler climate, so it would grow in this country. When I was a graduate student here in St. Louis, I was working on morphine biosynthesis, and we worked together with Mallinckrodt because Mallinckrodt was giving us our Papaver bracteatum poppies So at one point, Mallinckrodt had poppy fields in the state of Washington, the eastern side of the state, that produced not morphine, but a compound that you could convert to morphine and codeine and other drugs. But Mallinckrodt was required to destroy those fields at the time. That would have been in 1979 or 1980. And I know this because I lost my source of poppies for my doctoral thesis. So it is very highly regulated, and we are not allowed at this point, but maybe Mark has some insight about how that could go forward.
Well, I would argue that there probably are poppies being grown in the U.S. somewhere, just not legally, right? But Tony's got it right. This is a very, very highly regulated part of the medical industry. It's actually one of the reasons why Mallinckrodt is successful in this area is because we've been doing it for almost 150 years, and so we have really understand the very complex regulatory nature of this business. And you can understand why. I mean, the government is very interested in making sure that enough morphine and opiate pain products are produced for the patients that need them, but they certainly don't want to have them diverted into abusers. We source about 80% of our opium from poppies that are grown in either India or Turkey. And the simple reason for that is because there's a trade agreement between the U.S. government and those governments. And so under that trade agreement, we're required to source the poppies from those sources. Poppies are also grown, and opium is also produced in countries like Turkey, Afghanistan, actually Tasmania and Australia and France. And so we source the remaining 20% from those countries. Based on our long-standing experience now with this area, we believe it's highly unlikely that opium poppies will be allowed to be produced in the U.S. just because it's so difficult then to control the distribution of where those plants end up.
Know that opium poppy seed is also the baking seed. So if you like bagels with poppy seed and poppy seed cake, that's the seed of opium poppy. That is our foodstuff.
It might be in your garden, actually.
Now I know why I like bagels.
That's right.
Yeah, opium poppies do not grow well in St. Louis. It's too hot. We can get them to grow in the greenhouse, in a refrigerated greenhouse. Phil, I know you're dying to say something.
Tony, what's the Darwinism for the poppy plant to keep making more and more potent?
All right, so I want to generalize Phil's question in the way that I repeat it. Phil is asking generally, why are these compounds in plants, and specifically morphine? The plant products that we call natural products that are so diverse, that are probably millions of different molecules out there, are thought to be involved in the communication of the plant with its environment. Now, why would a plant want to do this? A plant is sedentary. If a plant is endangered, if it's under attack, it can't get up and run away. It has to have its own chemical defense. So by communication, I mean defense. It can defend itself as a poison. Many of our best medications are poisons in a high enough dose. It can make a plant taste bitter, so insects and animals will leave it alone. It can be like digoxin. Plants that produce digoxin grow very, very well in the mountain meadows of Europe when everything else has been grazed back, because the calves will come, they'll try the plant, they will literally experience a heart attack, recover from it, and never go back and eat that plant again. So they're very effective defense compounds. They communicate in a positive way, too. They attract pollinators. The nice smell of flowers, the colors of flowers, these are all natural products, and it's important to a plant propagation. Now, why a poppy would produce morphine, I don't have a good answer to that. That question comes up very, very often. Remember that opium poppy has been cultivated for thousands of years. It's about as related to its wild-type progenitor as corn is to its, right? This is an artificial system. Mankind, over thousands of years, has bred opium poppy to produce more and more and more morphine. It must have had, at some point, a defense role. But what it is acting against today is not so easy to say anymore.
Yes, Marty.
Today we are all concerned about the interaction of nutritional supplements we walk into a room of a marketplace and it's loaded with incredible amounts of nutritional supplements. How do we get the patient to disclose the fact that they are using some of these, that in fact are interacting with some of the drugs we have? As a result, things like people who are about to have minor surgery do not recognize the fact that garlic will prolong the bleeding time. And so the point is that forums like this emphasize the educational value of plants and the science in such a way.
Marty, doctors ask nowadays when you go. They ask you what your medications are, and they ask you also if you're taking any herbal or dietary supplements. So plant drugs are serious pharmaceuticals, and one has to be careful when taking them. And you have to be careful if you go to the health food store what you're purchasing and what the source is, that there is good quality control. We don't have a satisfactory mechanism in this country for controlling the composition, purity of nutritional supplements. Other countries are much more advanced than we are here. So one does want to be careful what you buy and what you're taking and what you're mixing it together with. They are serious medications.
And I think it's the solution is actually just education and communication, because you're right, most people wouldn't recognize that if they're taking nutritional supplements could interfere with metabolism of the drugs that they're taking. I mean, another common one is grapefruit juice. Grapefruit juice typically inhibits the metabolism of many, many drugs, but who would ever go to their doctor and say, oh, I just had a big glass of grapefruit juice, when the physician asks, what other drugs are you taking? So from the standpoint of the industry, it's very important that we work with physicians and medical institutions to communicate to patients that you've got to disclose virtually everything that you're doing so that a physician has a very good idea about how to prescribe appropriate medications.
We only talked for an hour. I'm certain there are lots of topics we didn't touch on, but we'll have to save them for another evening. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I especially want to thank people who submitted questions. I think this has been a very informative and successful evening, thanks to our two guests. I think they deserve a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I was going to call on Jim Carrington, but I think you beat me to it.
Well, that was spectacular. That was fascinating. I had a whole bunch of comments I was going to make, but by the time the program ended, they've pretty much all been answered or addressed or stated. What I was going to ask is, what are these things doing in nature? Why do we have so many of these drugs, what we call drugs, in nature? Well, they're part of this spectacular diversity of things that plants make and do. Now, it's part of this vast continuum of things that we are interested in, particularly here at the Danforth Center, that spans questions like we heard in a presentation this morning. What does a tomato make that makes certain types of tomatoes grow on rocks in the desert, whereas other tomatoes can't do it? It comes down to the chemistry, it comes down to the molecules, many of which are similar to the types of things that Tony and Mark talked about today. These types of chemicals sometimes impede us. There's a wonderful plant called castor. Most of you have heard about castor. Well, what many of you might not know is the oil from castor. You don't want to eat it, but the oil from castor is a fantastic lubricant, particularly at high temperatures. So lubricants for jet engines, castor oil is spectacular. The problem with castor is we can't grow it here in the United States because it makes a very nasty drug that spies use to kill other spies. It makes ricin. And because it makes ricin, it's a regulated plant, and we can't use it in this country as a potential industrial crop. And I could go on and on and on about the interesting things that plants do that span this spectrum, from drugs to fragrances to flavor compounds to paints. Many of our paints are made from plants, and on and on. So this is a fantastic, interesting topic. Let me come back and just wrap it up before I thank our panelists and Jim again, and come back to the point that Tony punted to me. What is it that's unique about the Danforth Center in relation to this topic or in relation to anything that we do here? The Danforth Center is a unique place because we're the only organization here in the United States that puts a premium on the highest level of scientific achievement. That is discovery of the basic workings of how plants reproduce, survive, and make interesting compounds like those Tony and Mark have described. We're an organization that then takes that basic discovery and figures out a way to make something useful with it. We translate it. We figure out, is there an application? And then once we do that, we figure out a way, how can we either get it into the marketplace or do something useful through the science here at the Danforth Center to do an application that changes people's lives. Maybe that's producing a new type of crop. Maybe that's figuring out a way to make a potential drug more cost-effective or more plentiful. So with that, I want to thank Tony and Mark and our ever-present host and moderator, Jim Davis. Thank you all. Let's give them one last round of applause. And thank you for coming. We hope to see you all again on our next conversations. Drive home safely. If there's anything that's dangerous out there, please avoid it. Drive carefully, especially tonight. Thank you.